Okay, so we'll start the session. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Spandana's virtual panel discussion. On behalf of all the MC members, we take this opportunity to thank everyone who's come together to discuss how we manage COVID-19 and the challenges from a Spandana perspective. So just a quick introduction to the panelists today. We are very privileged that we have our own Spandana residents who have graciously agreed to be part of this discussion. And just a quick short introduction of them all. And in no particular order, Dr. Sunil Karant, who is the chairman of Critical Care Services at Manipal Health Enterprises Limited. He's also the head of department and senior intensivist, Manipal Hospitals, Bangalore. Adjunct professor in critical care and medicine at Manipal University, and chair of HICC, member of Medical Advisory Board, chair of Code Blue Committee, and member of Pharmo Therapeutic Committee, chairperson of Bangalore chapter of ISCCM, senior examiner of IFCCM, and senior examiner for National Board of Examinations. His interests include trauma and neurocritical care, poisoning, obstetrics, critical care, and extracorporeal therapy. Then we have Dr. Kaushik Murali. He is a pediatric ophthalmologist and works as President Medical Administration, Quality and Education at Shankara High Care. He is an alumnus of INSEAD and also completed a course in strategic non-profit management at Harvard Business School. Part of national management team at Young Indians CII. Next, we have Dr. Harsha. He's a clinical and radiation oncologist who practices at Fortis Hospital, both in Bannerghatta Road and Indiranagar. He has 15 years of experience as an oncologist. He's a co-founder and board of member of Prana Healthcare Enablers. He works with industries in various roles and has keen interest in research and spreading health awareness. Next, we have our very own Saima Kanam. Dr. Saima is a molecular biologist and a virology expert with a PhD in these subjects. International Center of Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, New York. Area of expertise, design and development of a tetravalent, I hope I got that right, dengue virus vaccine candidate using recombinant DNA techniques and preclinical trials. Last but not the least, we have with us Dhyan. Dhyan Chidappa is a senior advocate. He is the youngest to be designated as senior advocate by the High Court of Karnataka in 2014. He is presently the additional advocate general of the state of Karnataka. He is a founding partner of a law firm called Crest Law Partners, having his offices in Bangalore and Chennai. He enrolled as an advocate in the Bar Council of India in 1998. He was also a solicitor of England and Wales. Welcome once again to the panel and participants who have eagerly joined to be part of and learn from our esteemed guests today. So we will go through a couple of topics that we had published. Over to Dr. Sunil to start the topic, just to give us an idea of what the magnitude of the current situation is. Dr. Sunil.
Am I audible?
Yes, doctor.
Good evening, everybody. At the outset, I'd like to thank the Spandana Association, SSA, and the MC members for actively organizing this panel discussion. I think kudos to the entire team and of course all the members of the community who have been helping the last 12 months. So all of us do understand that the last 12 months has been probably one of the, what I would say as a defining year of our generation. I mean, we are probably we have not seen wars, but I'm sure this is going to be categorized as one of those years which will go down in the memory of our lifetime as a very difficult year when we learned a lot. And I'm sure Dr. Kaushik and other medical members in the panel will agree that this is probably, from the healthcare perspective, has been one of the most difficult years we have had ever since we know what medicine is all about. Just a brief introduction of the magnitude of the problem. I'm sure these are numbers which have been flashed around by different news media and by Google and a whole lot of other websites. But I just thought I will make a few slides presentation just for us to understand where we stand today. So these are the India numbers, 1,32 lakh, or in other words, 13.2 million cases confirmed. And thankfully, only 1.68 deaths, which gives a case fatality ratio of around 1.6%. And as you all know, this is one of the least in the world, I think, for the kind of diversity of that we have in our country, and being categorized as a developing middle-level country economically. I think this is a fabulous job that we have done, both from the perspective of citizens of the country as well as from the government perspective. This is the caseload for Karnataka, 10 lakh 48 confirmed, or we have just crossed the 1 million mark last week, 12,000 deaths, and with again a case fatality ratio of around 1.3. At one stage, we were almost nearing 1%. So we were among the states of India, we were one of the least when we started off earlier in the pandemic. And again, thanks to the good work done by the government of Karnataka, I should admit that it was a very proactive approach that the BBMP and the government of Karnataka took very early on, involving a significant number of private health players, and a good example of public-private partnership, which was exemplified in the last 1 year. Global cases, this is the number for you, 29 lakh plus deaths. I think what is more worrying is this graph. So we went through the first curve, peaked on the 27th of September around, and then we started seeing a downward decline. And a lot of healthcare pundits and a lot of us believed that we will not have a second wave. But unfortunately, we are now through the second wave. And as we know, we cannot afford another lockdown. And I think this is going to be the primer for today's panel discussion and the lot of queries that a number of families and in Spandana were raising to the MC. So I thought so when the MC members approached, I thought this was a good opportunity for all of us to get together and understand not only the magnitude, and also to understand that this peak, we should understand, is going to be much taller. There is a prediction it could be much longer than the last one, and whether the fatalities are going to be worse or not, only time will tell. Case fatality ratio means the number of deaths, with the denominator being the total number of cases which were diagnosed, and that I've already told you is 1.64 for India and 1.34 for Karnataka. The silver lining is a vaccination which started on the 16th of January. 52 lakh patients or citizens vaccinated so far in Karnataka, and 1.2 crore in India, which gives a total percentage of something like around 1% or so, and around 6 to 6.5% are actually in the pipeline for the second dose. Positivity rate in Karnataka has gone up from around 2.0% to around 5.8% in the second wave, and is rising by the day. So this just indicates that the new second wave is started, it is going through and is rising every day. I think that is something we need to understand. So positivity rate just gives us an idea of where we stand with the infectivity or the spread of the infection itself. I think that is in brief the magnitude of the numbers that I wanted to put out. And just to make you understand that, I think the gist of what I wanted to say is that the second wave has already crossed the peak of the first wave by leaps and bounds, and we are seeing about 1.5 lakh cases every day, new cases every day. And Bangalore itself has recorded 5,500 cases in the last 24 hours. So I think this is definitely alarming numbers, and we need to understand that everything that has to be done from a public health perspective has already been done in the first lockdown. And I think it is our job and duty as citizens to understand that we cannot afford another lockdown, and we need to ensure that all necessary precautions, what we said as CAB or COVID appropriate behavior, which has been the term which has been coined, has to be followed meticulously and rigorously in the community. I think that's all from my end, and I'll hand it over back to the chair, please.
Okay, so what is our responsibility as a community and as our as a citizen. Dr. Harsha or Dr. Kaushik, would you like to elaborate?
I'll probably go first. I think as a citizen of the country, it is first important for us to acknowledge that there is a real problem. So a lot of us are still in denial. We believe that this is a concocted story, or it's somebody's trying to make money out of the whole situation. Ask any family member who's been COVID positive or who's lost a dear one. We've lost a number of colleagues. I've lost a number of friends through the pandemic. We know how real this is. So first and foremost, acknowledge that there is a problem. And second is raise your awareness. When I say raise your awareness, please be wary of the multiple WhatsApp forwards that come your way. You will see a number of people who are supposedly scientists who have their own theories. Do your fact check. The Press Information Bureau of India has a wonderful site where they do fact check for any news item that you find online. You can email to them. Within 48 hours, they will respond back. There are multiple other fact check sites online, or reach out to anybody from the medical fraternity who could guide you in terms of whether the information that you are going to share to your family group or other friends group is actually correct and appropriate. The last thing is act. Act first by protecting yourself. So like Dr. Sunil said, the COVID appropriate behavior, which means that we do sessions like this online. We're not next to each other doing a panel discussion. So there is distancing that comes. So physical distancing is very, very critical. That alone is not enough. You need to wear your masks. And third, please get vaccinated. I think that's very, very critical. If you are eligible, if you're above the age of 45, you should get vaccinated. I'm sure through the course of the evening, we will talk about the pros and cons of the vaccines. But long story short, get your shot. That's going to probably prevent you from falling miserably sick, even if you do contract the virus.
This is probably one of the few occasions where the doctor will say, take your jab.
True. Harsha, you want to add in anything to this?
No, I think mostly are covered. Just to reiterate, in sense, there is no, what do you say, we need to kind of keep repeating the message. The new normal has to be accepted. And I think wearing masks, especially when we are in a crowded area, when you are close to people around, I know there are further questions going to come around that. And the fact that we touch our face around 60 times, and since you look at the panelists now and start counting the number of times we touch our face as we speak to you, and you'll realize the reason that where you meet others, why handshake still is not recommended, why hand washing becomes a very critical aspect. You enter the house, wash your hands, soap and water is the best thing. In the absence of that, go for the sanitizers. And if you limit the number of times you touch your face, and as I say that it happens. So that's how critical it is that we stop the spread of the virus. And thus I think the behavioral changes have to get incorporated, and that is the foremost. And as Kaushik said, the vaccination, even if it happens to a rampant space, we have the responsibility that the vulnerable population needs to be protected. And the young ones, we are probably far more better off, but the vulnerable population needs that kind of a safeguard. And just to take the example, till this becomes like influenza, influenza still kills people. And influenza was in 1918 the same way what COVID is today. And today it is you know that the influenza shots are taken over it, yearly, at least in the US. So you are not bothered about the common cold as the same way as COVID. But till we reach that point, the behavioral changes have to be incorporated. With that, I'll pause for now. Thank you.
Just as we wear our slippers while stepping out of the house, now wearing a mask has become just another habit, right? So now we'll have to stop greeting people with handshakes, and remember not to touch any part of our face. Okay, so okay, so we take all these precautions, and for somehow, for whatever reason, we get COVID-19, we get test positive for it. How do we take care of ourselves? What is the first of few things that doctors recommend us to do? Dr. Sunil, do you be able to help us with that? What are the first things that we should do?
So I think first and foremost, you have to be in touch with a medical practitioner. It could be a physician, it could be a family doctor, because categorizing the patient as mild asymptomatic who can be managed either in a COVID care center or home quarantine versus who needs admission, I think that's the first thing that we need to identify. Obviously, everybody cannot end up in the hospital because we're talking about 1.5 lakh people getting infected every day, and we cannot keep getting everybody into the hospital. We do not have that kind of number of hospital or available beds. So the first thing is to be in touch with your doctor. One common thing that we advise is to ensure that the person who is turned positive, of course, gets into quarantine, gets into or home isolates himself or herself into a particular room. If the rest of the members of the family have not been positive, then they would be not coming into contact with the patient or with the quote unquote positive person. But if the entire family has turned positive, then I think the house needs to be quarantined. And when I say quarantine, I would again like to emphasize there is no stigma associated with it. I think that is something more important, because the psychological impact of somebody who has turned positive in some of the recent data seems to be much more bigger than the person having suffered from the disease itself. I think that is something which needs to be understood, and I'm very glad that there's talk about the support group being organized from this association as well. It is important to ensure that the room is sanitized twice a day. That's what the recommendation comes with any sort of solution, preferably a hypochlorite-based solution. But if not, any alcohol-based solution will do, and making sure that the vessels and the other hardware of the person who comes in contact with that is also sanitized appropriately. Now, for mild asymptomatic disease, strict isolation, wait for 7 days. I think that should suffice, and then the person. But if it is a person who is considered as a primary contact, 7 days, no symptoms, they can't come back. Now, there are some places where we do recommend a retest of the swab to ensure that there is no positive swab, in spite of the fact that the person has no symptoms, but that is only on specific occasions. Otherwise, the primary contacts do not necessarily need to be, if they do not have symptoms, and there's no need to retest them, of course, but that guideline keeps changing and from time to time based on the BBMP's sort of recommendations and the guidelines which come from the technical committee.
Okay, so that actually is the next set of topic. Dhyan, would you be able to tell us? So we receive a lot of updates, sometimes in very convoluted content. So for us to understand, interpret, and then it's left to people to end of the day do what is right. And it's very difficult for RWAs to implement anything with that kind of atmosphere. But what would be your advice to Spandana in that respect?
Rampriya, I think there are two things. One is, of course, COVID appropriate behavior, which is entirely personal to the person's concerned. And it's an obligation that you owe to yourself as well as to the society at large. But then the law also has caught up with it. There are actually two enactments. One is called the Epidemic Diseases Act, which has been applied to this disease. And the second is the Disaster Management Act. So the Disaster Management Act is also, and this is classified as a disaster. And therefore, all notifications which are issued by the government, whether it is the central government or the state government, are issued under the Disaster Management Act. Now, not following these guidelines or instructions or directions are actually punishable offenses. While we always seem to think that we can get away with a 250 rupees fine when we don't wear a mask, well, the Epidemic Diseases Act actually makes it an offense which is punishable with an imprisonment as well as fine. And it is only that because of the large numbers, and it's impossible to send everyone to jail, that they compound the offense and permit a fine to be paid. Therefore, people who keep believing, of course, that they'll not go to jail, it may not be as true, because you may end up going to jail sometime or the other if this becomes so bad that it becomes uncontrollable and people are still found without masks, then they may then resort to the next level of sending people to jail to set an example with them. And therefore, you see, what is important is there's a lot of misunderstanding as to what a public place is. Public place is not just somewhere outside your building or colony. Any place which would permit admittance of members of the public is a public place. Therefore, our apartment complex is a public place. The confines of your home, of course, is private, but the second you step out of your door, it's public. And therefore, if you don't wear a mask, you don't follow COVID appropriate behavior, you don't follow social distancing. In all these cases, you could strictly be liable for punishment. Having said that, now the government has, in the latest notification, said that you have to close down all the amenities and facilities. There's again interpretation as to whether you must close some of them or all of them and all of that. It's very clear, and the guidelines that have been issued by the state government make it very clear that you must shut down everything. So there's no question of keeping some of the facilities open.
Even if they are outside and outdoor facilities.
Outdoor, indoor, none of the facilities are supposed to function. So you can't play lawn tennis, you can't play table tennis, you can't play badminton, squash. None of that can be kept open. You can't even have the party halls kept open. So the language used in the notification is like party hall, gym and stuff. There's also a lot of misgivings saying some of the gyms outside are allowed to be open 50%. So why not open our gyms 50%?
Yeah.
One of the reasons why the government doesn't allow gyms in an apartment complex to be open is because you can't regulate them. And self-regulation seems to have failed quite badly in our country because we are not really willing to self-regulate ourselves. And therefore, there is a greater need to ensure that. Of course, I must also point out the High Court recently also has passed an order saying the BBMP must conduct surprise checks on apartments and to find out if there is any violation. And I'm quite certain that larger apartment complexes like ours will definitely have checks being done to see if people are following COVID appropriate behavior. So given all that, this time I think there'll be a lot more stricter in enforcement. It's just started with the numbers going up. It's just going to get worse. So my suggestion is please remember that you owe it to yourselves and you owe it to the community.
The safety, yeah.
To maintain safety. So when you go out for a run or you go out for a walk, it's better you cover your mouth at least. I know, I understand it's difficult to cover your nose as well while running. So, but ultimately it comes down to each of us as individuals to protect ourselves.
Right.
If I could just add a couple of points, I think there was some talk going on in the social media of the association that, as rightly as Dhyan mentioned, why public places outside the apartment complex are allowed. So I think this discussion actually did come up in the technical committee meet. I think there are two reasons for this. One is, as rightly mentioned, regulation is better when it is somebody else's property. When you enter a gym, the onus of responsibility is on the person who is running the gym. So obviously there will be some enforcement which will be done. And the balance between the lives and livelihood, which has been the debate of the last entire 1 year, and this time, since there is not going to be lockdown, we should understand that there is the question of livelihood of some of these people who are running the gym. So that is the reason a complete shutdown has not been mentioned.
Yeah, purely economic
yes.
Yeah, reasons.
On the other hand, rightly as Dhyan mentioned, no so there's no regulation within an apartment complex where it is largely voluntary, and that is the reason why these enforcements have come in apartment complexes. And also on this way, what we have noticed is clusters are coming from small communities, small gatherings, small institutions like, hostels or such common living areas. So that is because these cluster outbreaks are coming from these kind of communities. That is the reason, these are a couple of reasons for which this decision was taken, to ensure that these areas where there is no livelihood being lost, and that these are voluntary areas of quote unquote physical rehabilitation of physical conditioning of people and as well recreation, they have been asked to shut down. I hope that answers some of the questions which are being raised in various forums.
Right. So moving on to the vaccines as such, how do COVID vaccines work, and a little bit about Covaxin and Covishield, which we are currently administering. Saima, would you be able to throw some light on this?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. So Dr. Sunil has already said that the situation is very grim, and it hasn't taken us a lot of time to reach the peak, and don't even know whether it is the peak right now, or we still have time to reach that. The cases are increasing exponentially. So the good thing, we have 2 vaccines right now, COVID vaccines, and it's good that we have them, and the vaccines started rolling around 16 January. There are 2 vaccines that have been authorized for emergency use in India, which is Covishield, and the other one is Covaxin. Now, I would not want to go into the details. Both vaccines have good safety data. Both vaccines are high efficacious. What we want to look at is these vaccines, instead of focusing on the efficacy of these vaccines, they would prevent the infection. The thing is, the vaccines here prevent the disease. They are not going to prevent the infection. They will reduce the mortality rate. They will reduce the severity of the infection. So with the COVID-19 disease, no one is safer until everyone is. So please go out, please get vaccinated. There have been both these vaccines, there are 2-dose regimens. For Covaxin, it's a 4-week dosage gap between the 2 doses. For Covishield, the government has increased this gap to 8 weeks. But it's not, if you have if you have the second dose at the 4-week gap, it's not going to work for you. It still says it's 70% efficacious. Please go ahead and have it. I had been talking to one of a very senior virologist from India, Dr. Jamil, and some asked him, okay, how much gap do you recommend for Covishield? Do you want to go for a 4-week gap or want to go for a 6-week gap? And he said, the best should be an enemy of good. So I would rather have my protection early than wait for 6 weeks. So please get it.
As long as we get vaccinated within that time period.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So
the clinical perspective on the ground, I don't think there's much difference, as Saima rightly said. I think taking the vaccine is very important. 1 week this way or that way doesn't make much difference. The efficacy just goes up from 70-odd% to 80-odd%. So it's not a huge difference. But the severity of the illness definitely comes down. We know that there's good data for that. And I think the debate whether this is better than that doesn't exist. I think it doesn't matter. Now, people can argue about side effects. There are some adverse effects, but we need to understand that adverse effects are seen in every possible vaccine. It could be 1 in a lakh or 1 in a million, varying from this thing. And you may see some clustering of adverse effects because at no point of history have we vaccinated people across the world in such massive numbers in a day. So you will see some clustering of side effects which starts coming up in the media, but I think it is still an acceptable risk to have for an individual, for a family, and for the community. I think that is what we need to understand.
Okay.
Yeah, so one thing I would like to add here, Priya, is when we talk about efficacy, we should understand that both these vaccines, and all of these vaccine candidates right now, we have 78 vaccine candidates that are under clinical trials, and there are 13 vaccine candidates. They are already rolled out to get into for human consumption. So what we need to understand here is all these vaccine candidates, or the 13 vaccines that have been authorized for this, they are 100% efficacious in preventing disease severity as well as mortality. So let's not get into this debate of 70% efficacy or 80% efficacy. What we are going to look here is, this is a pandemic. It's the first time in the history of infectious diseases that a pandemic has been fought by vaccine today. We have never got a vaccine so early. In research, vaccine takes around 5 to 10 years. I had been working on the vaccine and we generated it in around 2006, 2007, and it's still in preclinical trials. So you can understand this level of dedication and contribution and science and research that has gone into development of these vaccines.
Okay. So how does this virus actually work? We understand how this virus infects. There are a lot of infomercials about it. There is a lot of talk about this, but very little has been said about this particular topic, and this had come up in social media in Spandana. So how does this virus does it come through the the sewage treatment plant that we have? Does it survive that, and will that affect people if we have put it in our water, treated water, and we let it go out? So that is one of the concerns that came up, and I thought I can address that in this panel. Sam, would you be able to tell us?
So what we know right now is coronavirus is an envelope virus. So it has the genetic material which enveloped by a lipid membrane. And this lipid membrane has these spike proteins. The spike proteins, they bind to your cells, and these proteins are the proteins that enable the virus to infect you. Now, the thing with the envelope viruses, they are very unstable. So when you talk about sewage treatment, yes, there has been studies where it is shown that a COVID positive patient can excrete this virus for up to 35 days in the field. So your wastewater, the research has shown that your wastewater is positive for viral RNA, but not for infectious viral particles. For transmission disease from any medium, you have to have infectious virus particles. Now, what you need to understand is your wastewater has all sorts of chemicals in there. Studies have shown that chlorination for 30 minutes at a concentration of around 0.5 mg per liter, it completely inactivates coronavirus. So there was a study which was done, I think last year, August, by Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology, Hyderabad, where they took samples from 80% of STPs in Hyderabad, inlet water, which is before treatment, sewage treatment, and the outlet water after the sewage treatment. So what they saw is the outlet water was completely clean. They cannot detect any viral RNA, any viral genetic material in the outlet sewage water, but they could get viral RNA from the inlet water, but no infectious virus particles.
Okay. So we'll move on to the Q&A part of the session. So there was a question from a resident. Typical size of coronavirus is about 100 nanometers, and a cotton mask we are wearing has an air gap of 1,000 times larger between the cotton fibers. Does it mean that it cannot provide us any protection from the virus? And why is this anomaly? Anyone would like to answer that?
I'll just take that if others have no objection. So I think one of the wearing mask has been a raging controversy, especially in healthcare articles if you see. But there is reasonably good data to say that what we call as the infective load in the atmosphere decreases substantially. Two large studies in Sweden and some other place, I don't remember the second place, have actually showed that when the extent of mask wearing in the community was more than 40-odd%, they found that there was a 50 to 60% reduction in the viral transmission. So I think that's the first part we need to understand. Whatever it is, we wear something is better than not wearing anything, number one. And it may not be protective for an individual, but it is very important to understand that it is protective for the community at large. Number two, there are specifications of what kind of mask you have to wear, which is well given in the even in the MOHFW guideline in the Ministry of Health website, very nicely given. WHO website gives very nice ways of how a mask can be made at home. So I think yes, in a very scientific way, it has to be a triple layered mask. Not when I say triple layered, not necessarily, I'm not talking about the triple layered surgical mask, but there are 3 layers which need to be there. We have given descriptions. But having said that, if you even any kind of mask, if worn appropriately, does give a variable degree of protection from 30 to 50%. So I think what we need to understand is reducing the infectivity or the infectious load that is being coughed out into the atmosphere is the primary goal of wearing a mask. And it is one of the interventions that is suggested in addition to a whole lot of other COVID appropriate behavior or epidemiological interventions that we need to follow. So I think the debate whether we should wear or not wear doesn't exist. Of course, if the mask becomes wet or it is drenched or if you've not cleaned it, then it's a different thing. That's why there are clear-cut guidelines given in the website of the Ministry of Health, which if followed meticulously will, I think, address most of these concerns about the masks.
Okay.
Just to add in, the virus doesn't fly by itself. So it's a droplet. So when you're sneezing or coughing, there is some saliva or something that is actually adding to the entire mass of the virus. So typically it has been shown to be about 3 microns. Otherwise it goes in a kind of a zigzag way and gets kind of caught up in the mesh of either the fabric or the 3-ply mask that Dr. Sunil spoke about. And today you have a number of reusable, washable masks. So even in our hospital, we don't use the commercial N95s. We picked up something from this company called Loyal Textiles, which is an Indian company, and we can be proud that this is the world's first certified reusable N95 mask. So it can be washed 25 times. So it's much cleaner, it's greener. So you're not worried about generating waste on a day-to-day basis. And it works very well. We are about 1,200 employees across the organization. Our infectivity, I think, was down to about 13 to 16 people through the pandemic. So you have multiple options today available in the market.
And we need to understand, rightly as Dr. Kaushik said, it is the projectile nature of the cough droplet or the sneeze droplet which actually is, which also matters. So if you actually can cut down the projectile velocity of that, you find that it up to the tune of about 30 meters per second is the velocity at which the viral particles can be ejected out of the human being when somebody coughs or sneezes in particular. So all these things are, I mean, it just makes sense, isn't it? If you have a droplet spray coming out and you can actually reduce that spray coming out of an individual or to the recipient who doesn't get that much of a spray, obviously the infective load will come down. Yeah.
Okay.
Even what kind of mask to be worn is also very clearly given in different guidelines, including the WHO and the Ministry of Health. A lot of places you get a nice tabular column. Even in the hospital, at every, what a security guard should wear, what a liftman should wear. It's all given very nicely in various tabular forms. So I think that is information which is easily accessible to all of us.
Right. Okay. So now next question is, should we insist on a COVID negative report for a person who's completed their quarantine? Right now, BBMP does not mandate it. There are some apartments, however, that are asking the patients to test once again. What is the medical opinion on this?
I think BBMP's guidelines are based on scientific data. So I think there's no question that somebody can overrule the BBMP. In fact, it is a punishable sort of, or at least it is a questionable sort of move if somebody insists that, you need to redo a test. So there are two things. One we need to understand is that the infectivity goes off after day 5, day 7, number one. Number two, for mild moderate disease, as we know, even from the first wave, there is no need to retest. People who are even hospitalized, moderate disease, there is good guidelines from the CDC, WHO, and from the Ministry of Health, which says that we don't have to retest. And after symptom goes away 3 days to 4 days, depending on what the symptom is, the person gets out of quarantine is the thing. And now for asymptomatic mild people, 17 days quarantine and out they come. There is no need to retest because likelihood of getting a positive test after day 17 is still there, which doesn't mean that there is an infection. It could be dead viral particles, which can go on to up to 3 months and sometimes even longer. The only situation where we warrant testing is in what we call as immunosuppressed people or patients for whom the virus excretion can continue to go on for a very prolonged period of time, but that is beyond the context of a normal community living. So I think what we need to understand, if the BBMP has said there is no need to retest, mild asymptomatic or home quarantine, absolutely no necessity to test.
Okay, so that comes to people who have been vaccinated, right? Some people have mild symptoms after they vaccinate. How does one, and how long does one wait to we understand from BBMB's documents that we need to give a gap of at least 14 days from the time they take the first jab, if that continues. So what is your medical opinion on this, and how long should one wait?
For the swab or after the jab?
Yes.
Yeah. So mild symptoms are known for about 24, 48, max 72 hours. But if the persistent symptoms go on beyond a certain period of time, and rightly as BBMP has said 14 days, or if the suspicion is high because there are other symptoms that crop in, such as worsening breathlessness or some drop in the oxygen levels, then I think test is warranted. Now it is, I saw a question which said that, is it that you turn positive after the jab? And the answer is a no. Turn positive means somebody has got an infection either around the time of the vaccine from outside, or maybe even standing for the queue for the vaccine. That could be a very strong possibility. But it has nothing to do with the vaccine itself. Because we need to understand that the vaccine produces antibodies in the blood, and it is not going to produce any form of antibody or any sort of antigen in the nasal mucosa or in the nose or the mouth or the throat. So I think if somebody turns positive, it is positive. We have to take it as significant because he's either got the infection in and around the vaccine time, or somewhere he's already had an infection in the past and probably is just shedding dead viral particles.
Okay.
Think,
so yes.
No, I just want to reiterate that the vaccine is not causing the infection.
Yeah.
Many people are, there's something called as a Persimmon effect. And I think people are taking more risky behavior when they're getting vaccinated.
Yes.
The moment you take a vaccine, you think that you're protected, and that risky behavior is kind of leading into the infection being acquired in that space of 14 days plus or minus. You will have to wait for the second dose to get over, and then almost like 2 weeks to a month's time for that 70-80% protection to kick in. With the first jab, you're not getting that 70-80% protection. And that's the most important thing which needs to be kind of understood.
Yeah, so there, yes.
After the second jab, we still would recommend COVID appropriate behavior to still continue, because as Dr. Harsha rightly mentioned, we are not, it's not a 99.9% protection like in some of the very few vaccines that we know about. So 80% protection means there is still a 20% chance you can catch infection. The only thing is that the infection may be much lower. So full protection 4 to 6 weeks after the second dose is we are talking about.
Okay. So, is it true that we are going to face a vaccine shortage soon? This is one of the questions from a Spandana resident.
So, if the rate of vaccination continues at the same pace, then I don't think there is any shortage going to happen. Technically, throughout the world, the different companies which are there have committed 14 billion doses, which is 7 billion into 2, 14 billion doses were expected. If the rate of vaccination increases, then probably there is going to be a shortage in the near term. And what news reports are coming in is that it is more of a logistic issue rather than the actual shortage of vaccines.
Okay.
Because some centers, there are vaccines available, but people have not registered. And since this second wave started, panic has set among the people. So they think that now it is far more imperative and important that we get the vaccine done. The awareness in the last 15 days to 21 days has increased, kind of creating an artificial kind of shortage. But having said that, if the rate of vaccination increases, then there could be a possibility that a small time period where the shortage of vaccines can happen.
Okay.
The other thing that is adding is there's almost a 6 to 10% wastage that is happening across states in India. So once a vial is opened, you have about a 4-hour window before you have to utilize it. And imagine 10% of vaccines are just going a waste because people are either are registering and not turning up for vaccines, or are scared and not turning up. So multiple other issues that are coming in. So there is a whole lot of wastage. Currently, there is a moratorium on export of vaccines. You would have read about it in the papers. So Serum Institute has got a huge bill, huge claim thrust from AstraZeneca. Until June, we do expect the logistics to not be ironed out, but there are, like Saima mentioned, there are multiple other vaccines that are in play. So the Sputnik is already undergoing trials. So we expect that production to kick in. Zydus and a couple of other companies also have started production. So those trials are in full swing. We recently read about J&J applying for trials. Unfortunately, Pfizer and Moderna have not applied to DCGI for trials. So Only once that happens, once the clearance happens in India, will that be accepted. So the vaccine, irrespective of it being cleared, or any medicine, irrespective of it being cleared in any country in the world, has to be cleared by the Drug Controller General of India for its use in India. So there is a time lag of about 2 to 3 months. Usually this is a year or plus. That has got completely compressed to this 90 days. So it's phenomenal in terms of the efficiency that we are seeing in the machinery in getting these medicines out to play.
So I think what we expect in future is India giving authorization, more vaccine usages, more vaccine candidates. Sputnik, as Dr. Kaushik has mentioned, has already tied up with Dr. Reddy's. Then you have this Johnson & Johnson. It is in partnership with Biologicals E of Hyderabad. So I think by June, we will have more vaccine candidates in market in India.
So if you take a jab right now and you choose one of these present 2 vaccines, which means that within 8-week window, you get vaccinated with the same vaccine again. Now, how long does this last? And given that they might be a vaccine shortage and other players are going to be, how long till we take the next jab, and should we stick with the same vaccine or move to other like J&J or other vaccines that have like a single jab vaccination available?
See, Priya, we have to, if you have started the first dose, you have to stick with the same vaccine, because
that is for the second dose, right?
That is for the second dose, right? Yes. But if you are eligible right now, 45 and above, please go. Don't wait for Johnson & Johnson because it is a single dose.
Okay. So that brings us to a little bit of a social space where, people above 45 only can have the vaccines. And there are people with severe conditions. There are people who are frontline workers who got themselves vaccinated. So, but there is a sort of a strata of society who are pretty much frontline workers, like people who work with autistic children, people who work with the elderly care. There seem to be very less, consideration for that, part of our society. Dhyan, would you know, will they open up to this segment of people as well?
See, right now the considerations have only been age. And of course, after you've vaccinated the frontline workers and the healthcare providers, the next part of it is the population who are older. You finish 60, now you come down to 45. Soon, I'm sure it'll come down to 25 if I'm not wrong, or maybe even 18. So ultimately, it is about trying to vaccinate as many as you possibly can, and then go on to other sections. I don't think there is any move to look at one particular segment of people who are helping. Let's say tomorrow, because it's very difficult to then make a bifurcation. Teachers will say you must give it to us. Engineers will say we are always out
working.
Then you have lawyers who will claim that we are in court every day. We need to be vaccinated. So there are those kinds of demands will always be there. Like for instance, lawyers wanted to be vaccinated in the court and open it up in the court. So we said, no, you can't do that. You have to go to the hospital or a primary health center at least. So these kind of demands are always going to be there from different sections. The only uniform basis is age, and we must follow that better to try and get vaccinated. But yeah, of course, I've spoken to several healthcare professionals as well as doctors and members of the bureaucracy. But everyone is uniform in their understanding that the only way you can beat this, to whatever extent possible, is to get vaccinated. It's only a matter of time. I mean, you just need to wait for some more time. It will open up to larger sections of people.
Okay. So, So one of the questions we received is there a difference in the protection percentage given that Covaxin is more or less the weakened vaccine versus Covishield, which is only the protein cover? I do not know what this means, but I will let the doctors answer.
I think they mean that Covaxin is the attenuated form of COVID-19, while the other one is a spike protein injected on the virus platform. Maybe that's what they're referring to. Anyway, the clinical efficacy is almost identical. I don't think there's much difference. In fact, the percentage is something like 80.4 and 81.5 or something like that. So as we said before, Covishield or Covaxin doesn't matter. It's only the debate is about what is the time duration between the two doses. That also, I think, largely is not so much on the clinical. I mean, maybe a little bit more efficacy with a little larger gap between the two doses, but honestly, it doesn't really matter. I think important thing is go and take your 2 doses and ensure that you take the same 2 doses of the same vaccine, which of course the government will ensure since it is all tagged to the Aadhaar card.
Right. So will these vaccines be effective against the new strain of virus? Will we ever get rid of the virus? It's one of the questions we received.
So typically, the mutants which happen, there are 9,000 to 10,000 mutations which have already happened. It's not that the mutations are not happening in viruses. It is a continuous basis. Take any virus for that matter, not just the coronavirus. And what we have seen is that of the different mutations, the South African mutant variant, there is some amount of evidence that the Covishield doesn't work against. So currently what mutations we have in our country, for all those, probably we are still protected. But this is a work in progress kind of stuff. As new mutations creep in, you will always have this challenge whether this existing present vaccine is going to be as effective or not. But you'll have to understand that the virus has multiple particles. And as Dr. Sunil was mentioning, you have taken a part of it. And since the Covaxin is a dead attenuated virus, while as the other one is like you're taking an RNA and put it in, and then it creates the spikes. So your antibodies, which if you can recognize a part of the virus also, they're still able to protect the severity of the infection. So the mutation can probably infect you, but the severity of the disease is going to be far, far, far lower. So the vaccine is going to help you in fighting this coronavirus.
Okay. So mandates wearing masks in public spaces, yet we see people walking without masks. Can we have a sort of how do we enforce this? I mean, all of us have children. They just want to be go out and play in the park and be children. So how do we face this? Is there any way other than the how to manage them at home, and the it does affect them psychologically, but is there any legal way in which, is there anything defined by the government, Dhyanan, in this area?
Yeah, there is a very clear instruction under the Disaster Management Act and the Epidemic Diseases Act that you must wear a mask and you must practice social distancing. But it's not possible to catch everyone at every point in time. So whoever you catch, you fine. Now, if the BBMP starts coming into every apartment and starts looking at people and stops them and starts fining them, then well, you'll have to deal with this. But ultimately, it is all, according to me, driven entirely by your own selves. You have to necessarily ensure that you take care of yourselves and take care of the community. It is impossible to have the government monitor us at every single point in time. So to whatever extent we possibly can, we must necessarily. So yeah, I mean, as I told you earlier, there is there are punishments, but ultimately, how many can you put in jail? I mean, you can't put the entire population in jail.
And certainly not children. Yeah.
To some extent. So that's how it's going to be.
Okay. So coming back to the medical related questions, there is, they say right now in the second wave, the virus attacks the lungs directly and people don't realize that they're infected before it is a little late. Would you throw some light on that, doctors?
I don't think the pattern is any very different. What happens is as the disease stays in the community for a while, we do see sort of some variants or some different forms in which the disease presents. There's been some talk about this kind of different presentation, but I don't think it has changed very much on the ground. But we need to suspect this disease whenever there is a suggestion of a respiratory involvement. About 80% of patients who still present come with a respiratory symptom, while about 10-20% may come with other symptoms such as vomiting, diarrhea is also known. And this was seen in the first wave as well. So it's not that the pattern of the disease has changed, but it's just that, one important thing we need to understand is as the vaccination advances, there is a likelihood that we may see a change in the presentation, because when you talk about a native or a new infection getting into a virgin community versus it coming into a community which is already partially immunized, we do see various changes in the presentation. So I think just keeping the index of suspicion high is very, very important. And of course, tests are now available willy-nilly, and a lot of rapid tests have come up which are about 96% sensitive. So things are going to change from the testing side as well. I'm sure Saima will be able to throw more light on that as well, because a lot of tests have come using PCR and a whole lot of other molecular techniques which have become faster and more sensitive as well. So I think better not to get this, lost in these reports. Reports of different kinds of presentation. Yes, there is a problem. There is a respiratory. It is a respiratory illness. Corona family of viruses are predominantly respiratory illness viruses. I think that is what we need to understand. But it can present in any form.
So now there is one question in 6 parts. Okay, and so the first question is that there is a resident who's following a lot of reports, and the first part of the question is positive or negative results of COVID test, is it 100% accurate?
No test is 100% accurate. So if there is false positive, there is a false negative. Okay, a person having a virus, you may get a negative report. A person not having a virus can come with a positive report. So the idea, instance, depending upon the kind of the test being done, it can range from 50 to 80%. And as Dr. Sunil was mentioning, newer technologies may come in. But having said that, there is always going to be variability. This is not just for the COVID test. This is across the spectrum. When you go ahead and get any test done, there's always a positive predictive value, false positivity, false negativity, which we take into consideration when we examine. And then the population, how many of them are infected, will also change this percentage to some extent. What do you think? I think Dr. Sunil wanted to say something.
Okay. So the second part of that question,
Rampriya, is
yes.
If you are RT-PCR positive, you are positive.
Okay.
It's as simple as that. There is no point in you haggling, saying that, okay, maybe it's a false positive and stuff like that. To assume it is positive, like
that's
Dr.
the safest thing to do. Yeah.
You need to protect yourself, your family, your community. Not necessarily in that order, but yeah.
I think I would also like to add that let the doctor interpret your test, because as I already mentioned, somebody pressurizes you to do a repeat RT-PCR on day 17, it turns positive. You can't push that person to quarantine for another 17 days, because we have had these problems, especially in the first wave.
Yes.
The understanding of the test was very poor, and people used to test themselves left, right, and center. I mean, at least it was being suggested and advised to get a job, you had to do an RT-PCR to get a lot of things. I think, of course, the society is now much more mature over the last 1 year. But I think my humble request and suggestion would be that if there is some test which is needed, let somebody prescribe it. And if it has to be interpreted, let the doctor interpret it. I think that will sort out a lot of problems for the community as well. I hope I have not hurt anybody.
No, I think these questions are important. Answers are also important. So the second part of that question is, after the first vaccine of Covishield, they assume antibodies are formed. However, if a RT-PCR test is taken after a week or so, the test may show COVID positive. How do they react? Do they have mild symptoms because of the vaccine, and within 14 days they test because the symptoms are just not going.
No, RT-PCR does not become positive after vaccination.
Yeah.
First and foremost, the first thing in that sentence which is wrong is that If we take a vaccine and go for RT-PCR test, the RT-PCR test is not going to come positive.
Okay.
I think we already touched upon this fact.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
just to re-emphasize, I think Dr. Kaushik already also has mentioned that somebody turns positive, he is positive. He has had a new infection or has had an infection in the past.
Already. Yeah.
There is either a live virus particle or a dead virus particle in his nose or in his upper respiratory tract, which has turned positive. So I think if somebody has a symptom, so typically what we say, SARI symptoms present, that's called a SARI, which is acute respiratory illness. Present, it does mean turn positive, you have to take it as a significant result. And that is how we even categorize reinfection in the current world and current time. If somebody comes back with a previous negative, comes back, but we can't say whether it is a new test positive or not, but we would still assume it's a reinfection. So I think a positive test needs to be given its respect and be treated as an infection. Unless there are specific reasons, we would not treat it as an infection.
Okay. So if somebody takes a vaccination and their symptoms, one of the symptoms is, pain where they take the jab, right? One of the side effects of that, rather. So if that pain or those kind of side effects do not go even after 5 days, what should a person do? One of the questions we received.
Yeah, I think it will be a bit of a worry if it doesn't go after 5 days. We'll have to look for other reasons why it is not going. It may not be anything to do with the vaccine itself. Maybe the injection technique or whether there's been a small bleed there causing a trouble, something else we'll have to see. I think we do also look at it if the pain is reducing by the day. If it is decreasing in intensity, then maybe we can wait. But I think at day 5 is a little too long for this vaccine to continue to have pain. But I think better to take help from a medical practitioner.
Okay. So the last wave, there was a lot of talk about boosting immunity. So looks like if this wave, how long do people have to continue their their vitamins, and how long
Vitamins do not
does it even work?
Vitamins do not necessarily improve immunity, but at the outset, what we advise every patient, irrespective of whether COVID or any time, improving your immunity through healthy practices is always welcome. There's no harm in kind of taking the due precautions, eating the right food, going out in the sunlight, getting your vitamin D, okay, having a balanced diet. All these are in general, sleeping for 7 to 8 hours. These are the essence of kind of improving your immunity. And whether you have COVID or no COVID, I think one needs to kind of follow that practice to keep your immunity good. That's my broader answer.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think one thing we need to understand is developing immunity is not an overnight process. When we talk about immunity, it is a cumulative effect of the last many weeks or many months or even many years. As rightly Dr. Harsha mentioned, following the right practices, which is or a disciplined life, if I may say so, with a good lifestyle, is a fundamental requirement for any immunity boosting. So you cannot say that, okay, from today I will change my lifestyle and I will get my immunity boosted in 1 week. It will not happen. You have to ensure that this goes on as a continuous process for weeks and months together, and only then you can talk about this thing. Of course, we also need to admit that there is a genetic component to this as well. So people do come to us saying that, I've never been doing this, I've never been doing that, but I still had this disease or that disease. So there is a strong genetic basis, obviously, but I think a good lifestyle is key to all of the prevention, or adds to the prevention as well.
Okay. So the next, trending topic now in social media is testing. In a community like Spandana, do you think testing will prevent spread of the virus? Would it? I mean, there is a scare, of course. If I don't have any symptoms, there is, according to our rule books, we do not have to test. But mass testing, is that okay, or is it allowed?
I would say that I would answer this question in 2 parts. If there is a mandate from the health authorities to do mass testing to check on the prevalence or to see if there is, what is the intensity of the disease in a given community, I think they will be allowed to do that. But as an association or as a non-medical organization or association, I don't think we can bypass the rule book. So there is testing criteria which has been mentioned, and I think it's very important that we follow that. That would be my broad answer.
Right. Last September, there was a government order that was sent to the health officials, and to RWA specifically, saying that if health officials come to you, you must test. So, well, is that so? This question is for Dhyan. Testing and vaccination does it have to be voluntary, or if there is a mandate from the government like that, leaving it to the health officials, if they come to our doorstep, do we let them in? As RWA, what are we expected to do?
Yeah, I think Dhyan has already answered that question. All these acts are being done under the Disaster Management Act. And I think there is no question of us not abiding by the government or the health authorities requirement. And this may change from time to time. And the whole idea of the Epidemic Act and the other sort of acts invoked is to ensure that there will be dynamic changes, and immediately as a community, we need to adapt to those changes. So I don't think there is any debate on, will I allow myself to be tested or not because somebody has come and asked. But I think as an RWA, we cannot sort of say that, okay, you go and test yourself because of whatever reason. But I'm sure Dhyan will clarify if there's any other points on that.
See, ultimately, the disclosure of the fact as to whether you have symptoms or not is up to you. If you don't disclose and you hide it, either you suffer the consequences of it, or you spread it to many others. Now, if you knowingly spread it to others, then the consequences are going to be very severe under both the Disaster Management Act as well as the Epidemic Diseases Act. Therefore, when you have a symptom, you must necessarily test, because anyway, as we've now looked at it very closely over this last 1 year, your test is only as good as the day on which it was tested. You could get it the next day. So it doesn't, to my mind, make a lot of sense to simply test for the sake of testing. You must have some symptoms before you test. And of course, there is a belief that, a primary contact, should he be tested or not? To what extent should the BBMP go ahead and find each of the primary contacts? These are all things, of course, you mustn't forget that the population is so large and the number of people in the administration are so few. Therefore, you don't have as many hands to actually go and do these primary contact tracing, which is essential. But still, to a significant extent, it has been done over time. And I know that the BBMP does call as soon as the test report comes to find out how you are, then ask you if you have a room and a toilet which you can stay in. And if your symptoms aren't very severe and you don't need to go to a hospital, they ask you to stay at home, so long as you ensure that you maintain distance from the rest of the household. So you need to ensure that these things are taken care of from a legal perspective. I mean, I understand with so many doctors, there are obviously going to be information as to how you must take care. But what is crucial is you need to take care of yourself, and you also need to take care of the community. That is why you have all these rules in place. Otherwise, you don't need rules to tell you to take care of yourself. And the reason why there is a punishment is to only ensure that you don't violate this. There's no other great joy in punishing someone who's walking in the street otherwise. It's only to ensure that they don't transmit it to others. So, well, if it gets worse, the punishments will get worse. The level of fine will go up. Right now, it's only 250 in BBMP, and outside it's 200 and 100, depending on where you live. But if you live in the BBMP area, it's 250 rupees for the first offense. But you can never be too sure. It could go up if people start becoming lax about the manner in which they take care of themselves.
Okay, so I think we have covered almost all topics that we had intended to, and also almost all the questions. So yes. Yes.
Couple of questions in the chat box, I believe. Since
Yes, I have gone through that as well.
Sure.
So I think one last question, is it possible to give vaccines for people who have very small children at home? I think this also has been addressed. So government is taking the age route. So
they're not been
as long
tested
as,
in pediatric population.
right,
Vaccines
and
have not been
hence,
tested,
yeah, and hence children will not be accommodated right now. Okay.
There are
Alright.
studies. I think in the next 3 months or we may get some more data, but right now they have not been tested on children below 18 and on pregnant women.
Well, they haven't been tested in trials for children under 12.
All right, so I think that brings us to the end of our panel discussion. So I think one last question, I think, okay, I think we're done with all the questions. Thank you very much, panel, we're extremely privileged to have you among us, and very graceful of you to accept and be part of this discussion. And hopefully we will have much more of these. Thank you very much for your time and the effort that you've put in among all the work that you have as doctors.
Rampriya, just a minute.
Yes.
Nagaraj Rao here.
Yes, sir. Nagaraj Rao is our Bangalore Apartment Federation president. Welcome, sir.
Sorry, I joined late because I got the link little later. Doesn't matter. But I think I missed a big part of it. I feel like I really missed something, the earlier part. It is so wonderful, so technological, so high tech that I never expected an ordinary apartment like yours would conduct this. This is much better than the quality that the Bafki Baths, much better than that. Anyway, first of all, let me congratulate all the people and the great duo of Priya and Sir and your president. I think you are doing wonderful job. I think we should get involved more in BAF, Bangalore Apartment Federation, for these things. According to me, of course, I retired from the government 26 years ago. I did handle a situation of this type in my service. I'm a biologist. I work for the Department of Sericulture as the head of the Sericulture Department, where I was entrusted with this discipline to control a pandemic in silk like the one that we are facing today. And I did the same thing. I analyze it as a self-discipline and a man management and the COVID. This is the same thing I applied there also, and I was successful. Here also, no doubt, vaccine will take care of the disciplinary aspects of the virus, but it is we who have to discipline ourselves so that we control the disease in our own selves, in our family, in our kith and kin, as well as the community and the country. I feel that this is very important. Now, coming to some of the issues which we have been able to monitor. Today morning, we had a meeting of all the council members. It was about 92 people joined us, all the different areas of Bangalore. And we have been having periodical discussions and webinars like this with the administrators of the BBMP at the zonal level. I think we should have one such thing here also in the East Zone. We have recently decided to have a tie-up with the hospitals, the apartments to have a tie-up with the hospitals for whether it is for testing or follow-up or the vaccination or even the CCC, the care centers to be established. Care centers cannot be established in all the apartments. I differed from the chief commissioner called me about 3 days ago, Mr. Gaurav Gupta, and said, what is happening in the department? How can we monitor? We have started monitoring, and we must have received the Google sheet, the sheet that has been communicated, where we try to monitor so that we give a feedback to the government and the BBMP. The fact is that many administrators are of the opinion that it is the apartment which is creating a lot of problems in increasing the intensity, because a few apartments had parties on went out and all the things to start with that gave a wrong opinion. So we want to break this ice here, and then we are following it up with a complete monitoring schedule. Wow, the latest that the technology has come out is it is affecting the children. So the apartments will have to be taken care of and clearly told that the children will have to be very, very to be kept safe, because it is this particular group that can go out of control because they are all fed up with staying at home and all that. So I feel that the apartment should take particular initiative in controlling. No, I don't know how to do it, but maybe the best thing is to be present with the mask and see that they also use the mask and still take them out in different places. So safeguard the younger generation, which is likely to be affected more according to the reports. Follow up the discipline, self-discipline, and as many of the experts said, that it should not be insisted upon, but when it is not being obeyed, there has to be a discipline, there has to be a penalty. That is the only way of dandam dashagunam. That is what is told. I just want, I'm so happy, I'm privileged to join this particular group, which is eminent, I should say, of all the webinars or the media. You should have taken this to the media. It is much, much better than any of the expressions that have happened so far, except Dr. the AIMS chief. He gives a correct picture. I like that. So with these few points, Dr. Kaushik, Sunil, so many people are there. In fact, it is a great fortune for me to join you. Sorry I missed it because I got the link little late, but still I could have joined immediately. There was a small question which was troubling me, which any of the doctors could answer. Does this virus result in a coagulation of the blood, resulting in blocks and the cardiac ill effects? Doctor, any of the doctors can answer.
The Covishield vaccine has adverse event reported that there is clots to be seen. The numbers are very minuscule. So in the population which is less than 45 or less than 35, and some different countries have brought out different guidelines. There, the use of Covishield vaccine is currently being done with little slower, because of the availability of the other vaccines. But the risk-benefit ratio wise, for all the vulnerable population and above the age of 45, we should not be kind of looking at the risk of clots and still go ahead with the vaccination program as it is.
Thank you. For me, as a super senior citizen, I have taken the first jab, and the second jab will be after about a week or so. I'll be taking the second one. I feel that there was hardly any effect on that, except some itching for a day. And then went on well. But the only thing is, many of the deaths that are happening now on account of a follow-up of the COVID, it is attributed mostly to the coagulation of the blood in the different vessels, resulting in the heart failure. I'm just, for that point, I wanted to check.
So there's a difference. I think what you're mentioning is that infection because of coronavirus resulting in coagulation is different. That is, in the severe coronavirus infection can cause different syndromes from DIC, etc. Dr. Karan can probably mention more about it. But the vaccine is not responsible, which I want to clarify. Coronavirus per se, when it comes in, there's a cytokine release syndrome symptom. And then the people who go into the ICU have a different picture altogether. And I don't think we were discussing the severity of the virus infection per se. But if that needs to be, there is a possibility, as in any person who becomes extremely sick, we have the possibilities of the coagulation going for a toss, as the liver also can get disturbed. But I think in the recent, as we started the session with the slide presentation, with the case fatality rate in India is very low, around 1.3 to 1.6%, or even lower than that. We don't see that as a major challenge, and overall the protocols in all the ICUs have been geared up where the mortality rates have been brought down considerably. Karan, probably you can.
I meant the virus, not the vaccine, doctor.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
As rightly Dr. Harsha mentioned, it's a fairly protocolized care now. It's fairly protocolized, and I think most hospitals are able to sort of run through a fairly good protocol. And since there's a good, well-entrenched guideline coming right from the top, from the Minister of Health and Family Welfare, right down from there down to every state, which has made some local modification, I think it's quite robust. So the treatment protocols are there. I think it's only that we need to get the people on time to the hospital.
Like they would say in statistics, right? These are all outliers, not really, things that could happen to many people. But it's a possibility. That's what you're saying. Okay. Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you very much, participants, for being part of the panel discussion today. And hope Spandana will come together and, let's face it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks a lot.
everyone. Thanks, Nagraj, sir.
Thank you very much for having sent me the link.